Hello and welcome to our final video supplement to Legal Aspects of Human Resource Management. I can hardly believe it, but next Wednesday is our very last class. In today's video supplement, we will briefly discuss the midterm exam. We'll also discuss the 3 statutes that you are responsible for reading this week, and we'll briefly go over the final. The midterm exam was very impressive. As you may have noticed, that I gave you 60 points just for submitting the exam, and that I gave you an additional 5 points for every question that you got correct. In my book, Recruiting and Retaining a Diverse Workforce, New Rules for a New Generation, you may have noticed that many of the issues that were raised were not necessarily violations of any of the statutes that we've covered. There was the potential for those statutes to be violated. So for instance, there may have been potential Title VII violations on the basis of race, color, gender, national origin, potential Pregnancy Discrimination Act violations. There might have been potential disability violations. However, you may have noticed that many of the issues that were raised in my book fall into that very gray and murky area of poor management, or individuals just not being entirely inclusive and sensitive to others in the workplace. As human resource managers, you're most likely going to encounter many of those issues. Very rarely are you going to encounter very clear issues of Title VII, ADA, ADEA, FMLA, or any other statute being violated. Most likely it's going to be issues that are on the way to violations of those statutes. So your job as a human resource manager is to be able to identify what are potential risks in the workplace and for stopping those potential risks when you see them. So let's get into the 3 statutes that you are responsible for reading this week. The first one is USERRA, Uniform Services Employment Re-Employment Rights Act. Whenever you think USERRA, think the military. The United States government wants to make sure that our that our military service people, our military servicemen and women are not penalized for being reservists who have full-time jobs. They want to make sure that our reservists have the opportunity to be reinstated after they've returned from active duty. If you can imagine, most people would most likely shy away from joining one of the military branches if they knew that, hey, if I go on active duty, I could possibly lose my job. So as a result, USERRA was created. USERRA ensures that individuals who have served up to 5 years of active duty are entitled to be reinstated into their workplaces. They're also entitled to receive benefits such as FMLA and any other seniority benefits that they would have been entitled to as long as they're qualified for those positions. If an employer wants to make the argument that its workplace has changed so dramatically that reinstatement is not possible, or reinstating the person back to the position that they would have had they never left the workplace, that's an argument that the employer has to make, and they have the burden of proving it. So with USERRA, I want you to just remember that it ensures that individuals who have served in active duty military service are entitled to be reinstated to their positions. Our next statute is Sarbanes-Oxley, also known as SOX. Many of you may remember those horrible scandals from the early 2000s. Enron, MCI, WorldCom, those were major scandals that rocked the business world. And they were all a result of accounting scandals and fraud to shareholders. Sarbanes-Oxley was created to ensure that shareholder fraud would be stemmed. So with any company that is publicly traded, in other words, any company that appears on any of the stock markets, that those companies have a duty to ensure that there is no fraud against shareholders, and it created very strict mechanisms to ensure that the accounting and to ensure that all the reporting and the auditing was up to par. So how does that impact the workplace? Well, let's say I work in a department and I'm noticing that there's fraudulent activity that could harm shareholders. So let's say that we're fraudulently reporting how well we're doing, that we're fraudulently reporting our accounts receivable, or how profitable a certain department is doing, or even how well designed a certain project is. If I report that information to the government, I'm considered a whistleblower, and under Sarbanes-Oxley, I am entitled to protections. So that's the goal of Sarbanes-Oxley, making sure that employees do not fear any sort of retribution from their employers for engaging in whistleblowing in terms of ensuring that shareholders are not being subjected to fraud. Our last statute is IRCA, Immigration Reform Control Act. All of us are familiar with IRCA in some capacity or another. So if you ever applied for a job, you may remember that within the first 3 days of getting this job, you needed to provide documentation that you were authorized to work in this country. So you either provided documents from List A, B, or C. Remember, those are the documents like your List A documents are your passport, your List B documents are things like a driver's license, and your List C documents are Social Security card. So let's say I go for a job interview and I get the job, and upon getting the job, the employer asks for my documentation to prove that I am a U.S. citizen or that I am legally authorized to work in this country. If I provide a passport, which is a List A document, I've satisfied my requirement to show that I'm authorized to work in this country. Or let's say I provide a combination of List B and C documents like a passport, or pardon me, like a driver's license and a Social Security card. As long as I've provided documents that pass verification, that should be acceptable. But let's say that this employer says, well, you know, she has this very Caribbean look to her, she speaks with an accent, let's ask her for another document. Even after I've submitted my U.S. passport, if an employer asks for additional documentation and has no reason to believe that my U.S. passport is fraudulent, or has no proof that my U.S. passport is fraudulent, that employer is engaging in discrimination on the basis of national origin, or my perceived national origin. And that's a big no-no under IRCA. An employer does not have the right to discriminate against employees on the basis of perceived or actual national origin by requesting excessive documentation to prove that they are legally authorized to work in this country. Who's legally authorized to work in this country? People who are U.S. citizens and people who have received documentation that authorizes them to work in this country, like a green card. So IRCA ensures that individuals are being verified to work in the workplace, as well as employers not being able to abuse documentation requests when it comes to verifying employees. Many of you may have heard of a program called E-Verify. This is a computer program that enables individuals to go onto a government site and log in and put in their information just to see if they're verified to work in this country. Once again, if an individual has all the proof that meets List A, B, and C criteria, that individual meets the burden of showing that they are verified to work in this country, and an employer cannot ask for more documentation. So those are the 3 statutes that you're responsible for reading about this week, and that you're responsible for incorporating into your online post that is due this Friday. As we said, this Wednesday is your last class, and we have a final exam coming up. I will post your final exam by Monday. So let me repeat, I will post your final exam by Monday on the e-learning portal, and it is your responsibility to get that final exam back to me by Wednesday, because remember, Wednesday is the last day of class for the mod, so I want to make sure that I get your grades in on time. So lastly, it's been my pleasure being your virtual professor. I look forward to meeting many of you and all of you in person. You're going to be receiving evaluations, an online link to an evaluation form within the next couple of days if you haven't received it already. If you enjoyed the class, if you learned a lot, if you have any feedback or suggestions and comments, I welcome you to add them to the evaluations and to submit the evaluations, because your evaluations are your voice. It ensures that you get the classes that you enjoy, and it ensures that there's great quality control to the courses that are delivered to all of you. So once again, it's been a pleasure meeting all of you virtually, and I look forward to meeting you in person. Take care.